All right, friends, welcome back. We're reading through the Bible in 2023. Today is day 5, and we're in Genesis chapters 21 through 24. I am going to try to keep these videos shorter. I've been talking about too many things. I think I could work through the whole readings every time, but that would be a lot for you to take the time to watch. So I'm going to try to keep videos to 10 minutes. I think that's probably a good length. And then maybe we can have a time once a week or so where we can do more lengthy discussions. So let me know about that if you want to do this. So I'm going to try to do 10-ish minute videos if I can, not a promise, but a goal. And then maybe once in a while or once a week, I'll either do a video additionally about something that's coming up as a theme, or we can spend some more substantial time in a dialogue and discussion. That being said, you can leave your observations, your questions, etc., in the chat box, and depending on time, I'll either talk about them here on video, or we can chat in the dialogue here afterwards. Today, I want to just think about a little bit Genesis chapter 22. That's Abraham's testing, Abraham's time here with Isaac, and how this story is introduced in Genesis chapter 22, verse 1 is this: sometime later, God tested Abraham, and he said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain that I will show you. So obviously some things have elapsed since our last reading. Isaac is born. Remember this whole story from Genesis chapter 12 that we looked at a couple of days ago, where we're introduced to Abram. One of God's great promises to him, right, is that he's going to make him into this great nation. There's going to be a multitude of descendants that come from him, and that he's going to be blessed, and that the whole world is going to be blessed through him. But the big obstacle to that is that he didn't have a son, a child, through his wife Sarah. And we saw the ins and outs and ups and downs and the promises, and God, why is this taking so long? It's not working. We're going to take matters into our own hands and try to have a child. And that wasn't the goal either. So finally, God's promise comes through. Finally, from their perspective, after this time, God's promise comes through, and they have this child in her old age. We see this later in the New Testament with Zechariah and Elizabeth, with the birth of John the Baptist, that kind of old age pregnancy thing here. But this is kind of this miraculous, she's past childbearing years, and yet God does this work to enable them to have this child. And now that all this finally happens, God says, take your son, you love, Isaac, this promised one, and take him to Moriah, and there he's going to be sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain. I will show you. So there's a few things about this that I want to mention. Many, many more could obviously be mentioned. But there's an idea that's been put into my mind that now I can't sort of get rid of wrestling with. And it's kind of this idea of wrestling. So there's a biblical scholar by the name of J. Richard Middleton, who has a book called Abraham's Silence. And he asks, and we can imagine this because of the story that we just looked at. So remember yesterday, we looked at in Genesis chapter 18, we looked at Abraham kind of having this bargaining thing with God over Sodom. Hey, if there's this many righteous people, will you not wipe them out? And then he kind of keeps lowering his number, and this back and forth thing with God. So Abraham goes through this whole thing, this conversation, this wrestling with God over the preservation of the cities of Sodom here and Gomorrah. And it's fascinating that when it comes time now for God to say, okay, Abraham, go and sacrifice your son as a burnt offering, that Abraham doesn't wrestle with God about it. And that to me actually is very interesting. Why doesn't he do that? Because as we saw yesterday in Genesis chapter 18, God doesn't even seem to really have a problem with Abraham asking him these questions again and again and again, and sort of wrestling with him. And it's kind of in this back and forth of the questions is kind of part of a learning process, really. Jesus did that with his disciples. He asked a lot of questions. It's kind of that rabbinical teaching style, or it happened in other philosophy as well, the Socratic method. But here, when it comes to this really intense moment, Abraham just kind of goes along with it. Wouldn't you think that maybe he would say, well, God, remember the promise that you made me of all these descendants? How's that going to work if I sacrifice my son to you? It's kind of, you would think that even if ultimately it has to happen, it's just odd with Abraham's character as it is. And so what I think one of the things that the scholar Milton asks is, maybe did God actually want Abraham to wrestle with him a little bit and trying to understand this? The truth is, I don't think we can know. It's not kind of told to us one way or the other. And ultimately, Abraham is commended in verse 12, back in Genesis chapter 22, now back in verse 12, for his willingness. So really what we can see at the in the big picture is that one of the things that God is looking for is for us to surrender ourselves to him, to his will, to his way, and not, as we saw back in Genesis 3 in the garden, not see with our own eyes what we think is right, but rather listen to the voice of God and give ourselves in allegiance and faith to him. So ultimately, we know that although this story may be troubling to us in a way, we know that it wasn't ever God's intention to actually have Abraham do this. Is actually is contrary to God's character. And so we can ask, well, early in this kind of revelation, did Abraham not know that God wasn't the kind of God that would want death of human beings made in his image, when we're told many times that that's why we can't just take lives because they're made in God's image? It's not for us to do that. Of course, this is a direct command of God, which is a little bit different sort of thing to wrestle with, right? So Abraham is known as a person of faith, and this speaks into that. He's not a perfect person by any means. He makes plenty of mistakes, has plenty of doubts, but the trajectory of his life, that's one of the things, I guess, for us to sort of think about. We get really caught up sometimes in the moment, in our failures, in our shortcomings. We fall short. But one of the things I think we should be asking of ourselves is, what's the kind of trajectory? Day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, are we growing in our trust of God, in our faithfulness, or are we kind of stuck in one spot? And then this, I guess, lastly, ultimately, I love how the kind of the story starts to end in verse 14. So Abram is stopped from actually doing this. There's a ram that's provided for this burnt offering, for the sacrifice. And so in verse 14, Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. And to this day, it is said, on the mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. Right? So we see some really basic things of the life of faith here, of discipleship: trusting God, listening to his voice. He'll provide, right? Trusting in his provision, trusting. So we don't just sit back for his provision. We follow where he leads, but then we trust him to do what we can't do for ourselves. That's kind of a core lesson here for today. So, yeah, a lot of good questions here, a lot of possibilities, but that's it for today. I made under 10 minutes. I will have just a short video to post tomorrow. I won't be live, and then Sundays are a day off. So hope you're having a great weekend, and I'll see you soon. Bye.